welcome to anyone who's tuning in to our video. I'm Lou and I work at Sandown Library.
And my name's Phil and I work at Newport and at Sandown Library.
We're here today because World Book Night is on the 23rd of April and we want to celebrate it with you. Their theme this year is Stories to Make You Smile, and you can see behind me we have a special anthology of short stories to make you smile that all the libraries across the island will be giving away on World Book Night.
To celebrate the 10th anniversary, we've selected 5 books each, making a total of 10 that are books that have made us smile. How easy did you find it choosing books to make you smile, Lou?
I didn't find it easy. I think I'm drawn to darker materials in general, and I felt like my selections were quite girly, which I didn't think I read particularly girly books. I had to trawl back through all my sort of records of reading over the years to make sure that I hadn't missed anything out. I'm quite happy with my selection. There were one or two I could have swapped in or out. What about you?
Well, one of the hardest things that we're asked for when we're working in the library is for people to find us a funny book that people will say, could you recommend a funny book for me? And I always find that's really difficult to do because humour is so personal.
Yeah.
But what we need to remember, of course, is that although some of these books that we've chosen are laugh out loud funny, a number of them are just books which make us smile, feel good about ourselves, and it's sort of like a comforting hug, really, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. So how have you done this? What was your process of choosing them, and have you ranked your 5 that you've chosen?
I haven't ranked them. I had to go through and look to see which were the books that really impressed me, and the memory that I have of the book is smiling.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel about my selections. So, shall we get on with it?
Why not?
Okay, do you want to go first?
Okay, absolutely. So my first choice is The Young Visitors by Daisy Ashford. Now, this is a book which was a bit of a forgotten classic, really. It was originally written in 1890 by a 9-year-old girl, and it turned up amongst her mother's papers after her mother passed away in about 1919, and was eventually published and championed by J.M. Barrie. And what you've got is a story that's written by a 9-year-old who has a extraordinary view of the world, because obviously as a child she absorbed lots of information. She obviously was one of those Victorian children that were seen but not heard, but she was soaking everything in like a sponge, because what we've got here is an excellently structured story which is very funny, and what is funny about it is her perceptions of the world, and that's what makes me laugh about it quite a lot. There's one bit, it's been put into paragraphs, but the spellings have been retained, her spelling, and there's quite a bit of humour to be had with the way in which she spelt things, but also it's her misunderstandings, and there's bits of the story where she doesn't even she gets the characters to say that they don't understand certain things. She's not afraid to admit it, she doesn't understand things. There's a bit where they discuss a portrait, there's 3 characters and they're discussing a portrait which they believe to be the sinister son of Queen Victoria, but none of them have the faintest idea what the sinister son of Queen Victoria means, if anything, and they admit it to themselves. So it's a story of Mr. Saltina, who invites Ethel to stay with him, a young girl, and it's their quest for love, to find love in Victorian society. And I think really what I love about it is that she must have been such a big reader as well, but she must have been a big reader of adult books like Jane Austen, because this is miles away from the sort of turgid Victorian moral tracks which children would have been exposed to at that time.
Yeah, you get the sense she really sort of took all the best bits, because I've read this as well. I'd forgotten, when we were looking at our choices, I thought we only had 1 book that we'd both read.
Yeah.
But I'm wrong.
I lent you this.
We've got 2. Yes, you lent me that.
Right.
And I agree with you. It's like she's taken all the best, most exciting bits out of the book she's read and managed to get them all into her book.
Absolutely, and sees it through to the conclusion. I used to teach, and I've read a lot of stories written by 9-year-olds, and they often sort of tail off, but certainly this one doesn't. So that was my first choice.
Yeah, that's a good choice. I can totally understand why you picked that one. It made me smile as well, even though it's not on my list.
So what's your first choice?
Okay, so my first, well, I haven't got as much detail to talk about as you have. It's The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets by Eva Rice. She's actually the daughter of Tim Rice, the man who wrote the... Yeah.
Right, okay.
I hadn't heard of her before. I actually only picked this book up because when I bought it, you can't see now, it hasn't, but when I bought it, it had pink pages.
Right.
And it appealed to me. So I picked it up not knowing anything about her. She had written a couple of books before, but I hadn't read them. And it's just, in my mind, it's like a delightful, charming book. It's set in the 1950s. It's the story of Penelope Wallace, who lives in a sort of crumbling mansion with her eccentric mother and her younger brother. She makes a friend one day waiting for the bus, and it's their adventures. It's funny, there's a little bit of romance. It's very sort of, I think the period setting is done well in it. It's just lovely. There's a bit of Elvis in there, and Matt Monro, who was like the British Elvis or something like that.
It was singing Milkman, I think he was.
Singing Milkman.
I think so.
Anyway, it's just lovely, and it's one of those books that I would always go back to. You know, if I thought, oh, I don't know what I feel like reading, I'm in a bit of a low mood, it's just something you can pick up. And again, it makes you smile. It's not laugh out loud funny. This is just a charming read.
And it's obviously been well thumbed because the pages are no longer pink.
No, they're not. No, they're not pink anymore. I've read it more than once. I've read her subsequent books, which are also good, but to me, none of them measure up to this.
Right.
So I can highly recommend The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets. I don't know why it's called that. I can't remember if there's a secret. I guess there must be. Okay, Phil, what's next?
My second choice is actually one of the choices for World Book Night, A Dutiful Boy, which is by Mohsen Zaidi. So it's possible that you may see free copies of this around, and if you do see a free copy of it, certainly pick it up and give it a read, because although I would not say that it's a book that would make you smile as such, it certainly isn't laugh out loud funny. It's not a funny book in any way, but if reading about somebody finding their true self makes you smile and makes you feel good, then I think this is what this book is all about, and that's obviously why it's been chosen. Now, Mohsen Zaidi is a LGBT activist, and he's also a top criminal barrister now, but his background is very different. He grew up in a devout Muslim household and ended up at a secondary school where achievement was really sort of denigrated by his peers, and became sort of rose above that to become the first person in his school ever to go to Oxford University and to study law, and which he also found difficult because he didn't fit into Oxford University at all. So it was all about a matter of sort of finding his tribe. But what he could not do with those people is to reveal his sexuality, that he was gay. Because of the shame that would bring upon his family, and to the extent that it would have affected his brother's marriage prospects as well. But it's not a plot spoiler to say that a member of a gay Muslim's journey to acceptance is that he does get through all this.
And his family presumably are quite accepting? Is that how
it's a long process. Right. And in many ways, because he's done so much with a short life, in many ways, my only criticism of the book is that it does slide over certain things that you wanted to know more about. But it's a long process, but he gets there. He does get there in the end. But what I think, it's still very important to tell these tales. You know, I've read a few books recently that have come out and have been quite high profile titles.
I hadn't heard of this one.
Right, okay. There's been Tom Allen, the comedian, has written one, and Will Young wrote a book which is sort of on similar themes, but they're also coming from other areas of the community. There was a book that's won awards which is called Unicorn by Amru Al-Kadi, which was subtitled The Memoir of a Muslim Drag Queen, and that book and this book would have these are high profile titles, and 10 years ago that would not have been the case. No. That the publishers would have wanted to invest in these books.
Well, that's the thing to make everyone smile as well, then, isn't it? Just
Absolutely.
The fact that they're in existence.
Absolutely, and the fact that this book has been chosen for one of the titles for World Book Night is brilliant.
Yeah, great. I've got a non-fiction for my next choice.
Okay.
It's something that probably everyone's heard of. It's 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. You've probably seen the film if you haven't read the book. I bought this secondhand. I can't remember. I must have listened to a podcast and they must have talked about it, and I bought it secondhand. I quite like the fact that it's sort of been well thumbed already. It is the relationship developing between Helen Hanff, who is a writer in New York, and an antiquarian sort of bookshop in Charing Cross Road in London, 84 Charing Cross Road, see. And it's just brilliant. It's just basically their correspondence. She writes to the bookshop, she asks them for some obscure titles, they write back. She's very open and what we would probably say typically American. they are very sort of British and official in their letters to begin with, and then their relationship develops, and it's just lovely. And it's sort of, the time period is sort of in the 50s, so Britain's coming out of the Second World War, things are in short supply, rationing is still in place, and she sends them presents, she sends them food and hampers. And it's just how, to begin with, she's talking to the owner of the bookshop, then she's sending messages for the staff, and it's just lovely. And she always intended to come and meet the bookshop owner, whose name I can't quite remember. And it's just how their relationship develops. It's lovely, it's true, it's real, and if you want to pick up something that is just the best of sort of humanity, really,
Right, okay.
I would say go for 84 Charing Cross Road.
And it's written in
form
of letters?
It's form of letters. It's all their correspondence back and forth, usually between Helen Hamps and Frank Dowell on the Stayland side, but sometimes from other sort of staff in the shop. Sometimes there's sort of references to his wife and children, and they send messages, and it's just really nice to see how, not so much her, because her letters are quite sort of informal from the beginning, but how theirs really relaxed towards her, and it goes from being a sort of transactional relationship to a friendship.
Superb.
And it's great. I really, it always makes me smile.
Well, I'm sticking with non-fiction for our third choice, and I know it's a book which you have read as well.
Loved it.
And we both love it, and it's Lucy Mangan and Bookworm, a memoir of childhood reading. So the thought of this book gives me a warm, nostalgic glow.
Yeah.
So I'm smiling already, and it is also laugh out loud funny. So as a child, Lucy, who is a journalist for The Guardian, read hundreds of books. She was a very voracious reader, and she would avoid social situations to read books. And what is even more amazing is that she has kept all her childhood books. So she is an expert.
Jealous of that.
Yeah,
you wish you'd kept
absolutely.
All of yours.
So really, she is an expert on children's literature from a child's perspective, isn't she? Because she can remember how each book made her feel. Also, another thing I really love about this book is that she stresses the importance of libraries, and that's something that runs through it, and how important the libraries were for her. And I think this is the most enjoyable book that I have read about children's literature. You can also find out things about her family life, and I've actually written down a couple of quotes here because I think she really does hit the nail on the head. She says that you can't wear out a book's patience. It remains the same as long as you need it. Whereas you might keep asking a teacher or a parent the same thing, and they may get a little bit annoyed. The book will stay the same and explain it exactly the same way. I think that's beautiful. And she also says about her son, who she's trying to encourage the same reading habits, that it is my hope that our son will read our amalgamated collection and become the world's first fully rounded person. Which is just brilliant. And also she's really perceptive about authors of the time, and also I think at the time she's not as old as me, but she's older than you, isn't she?
Yes,
she probably comes
sort of
about in the middle of us. And there wasn't the wealth of children's literature, and you were reading books from a previous generation, obviously, books that sort of lasted. And somebody who has lasted ever since, it was Enid Blyton. And she says of Enid Blyton, she was national comfort reading at a time when mental emotional resources were too depleted to deal with anything more complex. So maybe we're due for another big Enid Blyton revival as a result.
Well, actually, I think we are. I've been reading Enid Blyton's I can't remember it's a short story collection to one of my nieces, and she's loving it. Rotten Rascals.
Oh right, okay.
And and I think it is. I think it's that sort of. It is comforting. And there's a reason. Yes, she's not politically correct, and there's issues with them now, but there's a reason that she's endured, isn't there? And
absolutely.
Brilliant.
So it's a real blast of nostalgia, because as well as the authors like Enid Blyton, who we'll remember, she unearths authors that you may have forgotten about. I know you loved her on the Sweet Valley High series, didn't you?
Yeah, I was really excited that she had that in there, and I think it's surprising how many people did read Sweet Valley High.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so that's my
a good choice.
Third choice.
Okay, so my next choice, going back to fiction, is Mrs. Harris. All of mine have been made into films, or not all of them, but this one has. It's been made into a film. Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris by Paul Gallico. And it's the story of a salt of the earth London char lady I think this is the 50s or 60s, 50s maybe. And Charlady, she's cleaning in the house of a very rich customer one day, and she comes across a Dior dress and she just loves it. And she thinks it's the most beautiful thing she's ever seen. And she decides she's going to scrimp and save and buy one. She's not wealthy. It's a lot of effort for her. She goes without lots of stuff. She saves up, and then she realises she has to go to Paris to get a Dior dress. And it's sort of from there, it's her adventures, it's the people she encounters, and how she charms them with her ways and her openness and her willingness to try sort of different things, get on and achieve what she wants, which is get her Dior dress. And obviously it's a bit of a shock when she bowls up at the house of Dior to get her dress, and
Right.
she's sort of a bit shabby, a bit run down, but she sort of just charms everyone into helping her, you know, do what she's there to do, and it's just brilliant. And the film is great as well. I watched the film first with Angela
Okay.
Lansbury.
All right.
I watched it one Christmas and it was just fantastic. I just loved it. And I only came to the book fairly recently, I think in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. And I still haven't read Mrs. Harris Goes to New York, which is at the back of this book. But
Right.
I will. It's
Yeah.
just something I'm sort of holding back to treat myself to when I need it. So, have you seen the film?
I've
or
not
read
seen the
book?
film, but I have read a couple of things by Paul Gallico, who wrote very different things, because he wrote the book what the film The Poseidon Adventure was based
I
on.
didn't know that.
Right, okay. And also he wrote a real sad tear-jerking book called Snow Goose, which I think was about
Oh.
Dunkirk and the boats going backwards and forwards. So yeah, there was quite a range of books that
Yeah,
he
I
produced.
haven't read anything else by him,
Right.
and they sound completely different to this.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm not sure whether I'd pick them up or
No,
not.
fair enough.
But this one I would just recommend to anyone who, you know, has ever wanted a really nice dress.
Right, I'm going with classic fiction for my fourth choice, a classic comic fiction which I think is still very underrated. E.F. Benson, Map and Lucia. You used to have to buy them in individual books. There's 6 altogether, but now there are omnibuses, a couple of omnibuses at a very reasonable price from Wordsworth Classics, and Wordsworth Classics
That's a
doing
nice
a great
copy as
job.
well. I like the cover.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so you've got 3 books in this one. I've read the other 3 as well. I've read them all a couple of times actually. He was quite a prolific writer, wrote lots of different things, quite a lot of horror, but this is probably what he's most famous for. And I think they were sort of forgotten for quite a long time. There's been a couple of TV adaptations which have sort of sparked interest in them again. But really, the TV adaptations, although they're very good, they don't really fit in the series of the books, because although everybody thinks of them as Map and Lucia, and the TV series is always called Map and Lucia, they don't actually meet until the 4th book in the series.
I had no idea. I haven't read them. I want to.
Right,
I'm sort of
okay.
surprised at myself for not having read them.
Right. So what he did first of all was start with Lucia, who is very much a sort of a 1930s, I suppose, 1920s, 1930s version of Hyacinth Bouquet,
Right.
a real sort of social snob who lives next door to her camp friend Georgie, who's an absolutely delightful character. So the first book, which is Queen Lucia, is absolutely my favourite of all of them, but Miss Mapp isn't in it at all. And in fact, the place where they live, which is the place which is famous for Map and Lucia, is Rye in Sussex, which Benson calls Tilling. But the first series is actually set in a place which is called Riseholme, which is Broadway in Oxfordshire. So it's a different part of the country.
Yeah.
So he does that in the first book. Then the second book, he introduces Miss Mapp with a whole different series of characters in this place called
Oh,
Tilling.
so that even then they don't cross paths.
No, it's completely separate. And then what must happen, and not until the 4th book, he obviously has got these 2 separate sets of characters that he wants to bring together, and does so in the 4th book when Lucia and Georgie, the next door neighbour, go to live at Tilling where Miss Mapp is, and then you've got the characters together.
Oh, okay.
Having said that, those books aren't as good for me as the first one, but they get up to lots of adventures, and it's funny. And if you like sort of things like P.G. Wodehouse and things like that, I think this is actually funnier than that sort of classic type light literature.
Never read any P.G. Wodehouse.
Right,
either.
okay. There is a lovely bit in Map and Lucia when the Map and Lucia are flooded out of their home, and they hide on a kitchen table which goes sailing out into the sea.
Right.
And then everybody thinks they're dead, and they come back to witness their own funerals, which is a
Yeah.
joyous moment in the book, and one which has sort of stuck with my
Yeah.
head. But it's not until the fourth book in the series, and what the TV adaptations have done is they've taken bits from the other books and placed it into the setting from the
I
fourth
remember
book.
watching a recent adaptation, and they were both in it from the beginning.
Yeah, that's
I had
right.
no idea that
Yeah,
it was.
that's
it
right.
takes longer in
Yeah,
the books.
yeah.
Interesting.
So still, I think this is still very underrated and a real good read to make me smile.
Okay, well, it's confession time now. I never thought I'd admit this on the internet, although I think I probably already have when we've been doing our book reviews and things. I love Georgette Heyer. I was embarrassed to admit it when I started reading them. I'd sort of hide them, you know, when I was buying them. But she's a fantastic writer, and I think she's really underrated. I think she's been classed along with like Barbara Cartland and really sort of like now authors that we would be a bit like, oh, I wouldn't read them.
Yeah.
And she's fantastic. So I've chosen Friday's Child as my book, as my pick for this, but I love all of her books. I've enjoyed all of them, and I probably started reading them. Oh, I know why I started reading them, because The Guardian told me it was okay.
Right.
Like, you know, when they do those lists of the 100 best novels, they did a whole thing, a series. They did 100 best romance novels, 100 best crime novels, and in the 100 romance novels, they had Regency Buck by Georgette Heyer. And I thought, wow, I've been sort of looking at them for a little while thinking, well, they sound like they'd be good. And when The Guardian told me it was in their top 100, I thought, this is acceptable now. And it was sort of like, if you like Pride and Prejudice, read Regency Buck.
Right.
So I did. I don't think I read it first, but I sort of thought, well, I've got the permission to read them now. And they are just Regency England. She's got her own brilliant vocabulary. She's got sort of words that she's looked up, and she's very historically accurate.
Yeah.
And they're witty. They're not like your Bridgerton novels. They're completely sort of closed door, all building up to the sort of like the you know, the romance sort of happening. They're funny. This one is hilarious. It just makes me laugh out loud. It's sort of not doing a good job describing it, but they're all romances. They all have a happy ending.
Yeah.
And this one is completely sort of unbelievable. There's Lord Sheringham. He's sort of a rich young buck in London, who hasn't got control of his own finances until he gets married. So he has a falling out with his uncle, who's sort of holding the purse strings, and he decides he's going to marry the first woman he sees. And it happens to be Hero, a girl he's known from childhood. And it's basically, you know what's going to happen. But it's hilarious. The side characters are just as well written as the main characters. This one did make me laugh out loud.
Right.
They all make you smile. And she's just, well, there's loads of quotes on the back from sort of contemporary authors just saying she's unbeatable. And it's true. For what she does it really well.
Yeah.
They're really funny. And I think she deserves a bit of a comeback. And I think that she should be adapted for television as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's just... I would always go to her. She would be my main stop if I needed a book to make me smile. I think if I was ranking these, she'd be my number one.
Okay, right.
So, but you just have to Google what they're about, because I haven't really told you much about it.
But she is an author that when somebody discovers her, then
they work through.
Absolutely.
I was addicted to them. My reading group, I was in the literary fiction reading group at Waterstones, our local Waterstones. And they sort of teased me a bit mercilessly about it. But they all said they'd had a spell where they read them.
Yeah.
So they kind of were like a bit... They weren't condescending, because they were a really nice group of people and they won't see this. But they all were like, oh, Georgette Heyer, you know. But they'd all read them at some point in their lives.
People also love her crime novels as well, don't they?
I haven't been able to get into those.
Right, okay.
I think I tried one, but I'm not a massive crime fiction reader, so... but yeah, just brilliant. And I think I bullied you into reading one of them.
I did, but I can't remember what I read. I think I might have read Frederica.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Right.
I think that is what you
But I did enjoy it, and I thought I would certainly not rule out reading more of them.
Because she does it well, even if it's not your thing, perhaps. What she writes is good quality writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I love her.
My fifth choice is a novel, a more modern novel, and it's a book which I feel that I've been pushing on people
I'd say so.
ever since it was published in 2016, and I always get very good feedback from people, but I still think it's very much under the radar, this title. It was a debut novel, and we know that lots of debut novels do tend to get lost and don't get the sales that they deserve. But this, to sum Our Song at Dawn by Emma Claire Sweeney up, it is a heartwarming novel. It's about a lady who's pushing 80, who has lived most of her life in a Morecambe guest house that she inherited from her parents. And it's a modern setting, and nowadays it is a holiday home for guests with disabilities and their carers. So she's totally devoted to this guest house and has put her whole life in it, but that sort of hides a sadness from her past. So you've got two narratives in here. Where you've got a present day narrative where Maeve is sort of an honorary grandma to two members of staff who fall in love, who both have Down syndrome. So that opens up a lot of issues with the people that are supporting them. And also there is a story from the mid-50s when her family was centred on the care of her severely disabled twin sister, when institutionalisation was the recommended option. And the past and present combine when an old friend of hers seeks her out. Now, I've made that sound very serious.
Yeah, I was going to say it doesn't sound like a cheery read.
But it's not at all. And also the dual narrative. I know lots of people complain about dual narratives because they skip around all over the place. You don't know how. But this has been done beautifully, I think, really it has. And there is, although it shows sort of the attitudes towards disability have improved in the last 60 years or so, but it acknowledges the tremendous uphill challenges that are still faced, but it's not at all grim. It is funny. It's about love and friendship ultimately, and it may bring a tear to your eye, but it will also make you smile as well.
Okay, I'm not averse to a tear. Right, so my last choice, I've gone for a classic this time, and I didn't know whether to pick this or not because I think I've read it a couple of times, and it is The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas. And it's no secret among the people who know me that he's my favourite author. I love all of his books. The Count of Monte Cristo is my favourite book ever. But when I think about what makes me smile, it's the Musketeers, and it's the swashbuckle, and it's the adventures they go on, and it's just a classic for a reason. It's just brilliant. I love it in all its formats. I really enjoyed the recent sort of BBC adaptation. I think I made you watch. And they're characters that have been around for such a long time. They're just sort of part of our, well, not our lives, because that sounds silly, but everyone's aware of the Three Musketeers.
Everyone's aware, but we don't really know the story as such, do we?
No.
It's one of those things that you sort of have like perception that you know the story, but because where it's all been changed around a bit,
that's
the actual book is
and I probably couldn't still tell you the main plot, because there's always so much going on in his books, which is part of what makes them so brilliant. I listened to it fairly recently. I think more recently than I read the physical book. Still can't really tell you what happened.
Okay.
But it's because there's so much, and there's so much to enjoy, and all the characters get quite a good sort of portion of the action themselves. It's not difficult to read. I think that's another thing when people see sort of classics like this and sort of think, oh no, I can't sort of put up with that. Easy to read, really good adventure, always a bit of romance in these as well. I just can't recommend it enough. And I mean, it's slimmer than The Count of Monte Cristo if you wanted to start with one of his works and you didn't sort of know where. I've worked through so many. I remember being so happy when I found way more of his novels in a foils bookshop than I knew existed.
Right, okay.
I guess almost before the internet, otherwise why didn't I look it up? That ages me really badly. But it was just like, I was going to a concert and I had to take all these books with me because I bought them and I just had to have them. So, and I think it was The Three Musketeers I probably read first of his, so there you go. It always makes me smile. Any of his books do, really, so I would always come back to them.
I've read The Count of Monte Cristo recently on your recommendation.
Yes.
Absolutely loved it and could not put it down. No. And it's a book the size of a doorstep.
It's a doorstep, yeah.
Right.
So that was a nice little roundup. I've got a question for you though. So we've talked about books that make us smile. What's the book what's the saddest book you've ever read, or made you cry, or made you feel depressed afterwards?
See, I don't often feel sad when I read a book. Maybe I am cold-hearted. I do if there's animals involved.
Yeah, obviously.
And Christmas was once ruined when my mother-in-law gave me a copy of Dennis O'Connor's Paw Tracks in Moonlight, which was a book about a cat, which and then she made me read it, which, yeah, I've loved my way through that. I would say there's a couple. One I've got here, which is The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay, who we recommend to everybody, both of us.
It was our book of the year last year, jointly.
It was
wasn't it?
jointly our book of the year, yeah. There's also one other, there's one other author that tends to make me cry, which is John Boyne. The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas made me cry on a bus, and I will not forgive John Boyne for that.
No, I wouldn't.
How about you?
I cried at that one. I've also cried at John Boyne novels. I would have to say A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry.
Oh, right, okay.
I knew it was going to be sad. As I progressed through it, there were sort of signs, but when I finished it, I read, and you'll laugh, but for 45 minutes I cried, full on like sobbing. And I don't think I've ever cried at a book like that before. It was a brilliant book, and I would recommend it. I'm never reading it again. But also Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara.
Oh, right, okay.
I didn't cry, but I was depressed for a fortnight afterwards. But I still loved it, so I would recommend it.
Well, maybe we should go back to Smiling, and we just take a couple of minutes just to talk to you about the Stories to Make You Smile, which is one of the titles for World Book Night, and it's the title which have been sent to Isle of Wight libraries, and there'll be lots of events that we're passing them on to people, so people in the community get a chance to read this. It's a selection of stories that have been, I would imagine, specially commissioned for the book,
yes,
because looking at the publication dates, they're all 2021. Or 2020, and we've chosen to look at one of the stories in the books just to talk about, and they're very short, and they're
really
bite-sized cup of tea reads, aren't they?
And
really?
they're authors that they're good quality, well-known authors. It's a really nice little anthology.
Absolutely. There's Jenny Eclair, there's Richard Madeley, Katie Ford, Dorothy Coomson, Helen Lederer, and the one who we've chosen is Vaseem Khan. And the story that's in here is Blind Justice. Now, neither of us had read Vaseem Khan before.
I was aware of him. I knew he had books, but no, I'd never read any of his work before.
And the story that's contained in here is called Blind Justice, and it really is a taster, isn't it, for his books?
For his detective, his is he a detective? I think he's called a detective, inspector.
He's a private detective, Chopra. Yeah, and the series is the Baby Ganesh Agency series, and Baby Ganesh is an elephant. And so we've got this private detective who is going around with an elephant in the back of a jeep, I think, isn't it?
And it's brilliant. I wasn't expecting that at all. I mean, I know that you don't ever know what to expect when you read an author you haven't read before, but I didn't know the name of his series. I knew he'd had a series, and I didn't know that Ganesh was an elephant,
right?
And that was sort of a character in his books. It was that did make me smile.
Yeah, it's a nicely structured little story, isn't it?
I
and it
so.
acts as a nice taster for the book, and I would certainly read his books as a result.
Yeah, I think I would as well. I thought it was really nice. And the setting in India is, I always like reading in different places, different settings.
Sure.
And a baby elephant. I mean, what do you want in a book, really?
Absolutely. So look out for copies of Stories to Make You Smile if you're on the Isle of Wight, because that's the book that the library service has been granted from the World Book Night people.
Yeah, and so with World Book Night fast approaching on the 23rd of April, and they're doing reading hour. So on the 23rd of April between 7 and 8 p.m, they are encouraging everyone to set aside time, read a good book. What will you be reading on World Book Night?
Right, well, I'm just about to start a bit of a challenge because I have never read Don Quixote, and I'm going to give it a go and see how I get on.
Yeah.
I've got a feeling that, like Dumas, it might be a bit easier than I'm expecting it to be, but we shall see.
I'm not sure, I've tried.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm certainly going to give that a go for the hour.
Excellent.
I won't get very far with it. But there's an hour to start off with. And how about you?
Well, I'm currently reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell.
All right.
And so I'll be finishing that off. I'm a good way through it. I'm loving it. It's such a good book. It puts me in mind of how I felt about Wolf Hall while I was reading that. You really feel like you're in that time period.
Okay.
Really immersed in the characters. So I'm looking forward to finishing that one off and then looking for my next book.
Excellent.
Okay, well, thank you so much for tuning in, if indeed anyone has tuned in. We're not sure whether we'll have managed to keep your attention this long. If you did enjoy this, leave us a comment, let us know, because if it's something that we think people might be able to endure again, we could produce something else maybe. So let us know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in a library soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.